Welcome back. This final segment finishes up our dissertation on timber framing in the Salem County and surrounding areas. And thanks so much for all our participants. They're real champions of history here. They're real propagators of history, and all of their properties are the creme de la creme in the area, and their properties should be seen when open, and they are the chef d'oeuvres of timber framing houses here. So again, thanks to everyone, and let's continue with our program and finish up, okay? So we're going to go down from the roof to the clapboards. So sawn clapboards. By the early 1700s, sawmills were turning out large quantities of clapboards that ran as long as the length of a log. Throughout the century, the builder had four types to consider. A trend toward under-sheathing of boards. This comprised an auger cut-butt joint. White pine had become the favored wood for clapboards. As with shingles, pine was soft and easily worked, had no troublesome heartwood or sapwood, and actually was more enduring than oak when exposed to the weather. White cedar and hard pine also had their good points. They were used to a lesser extent. The Georgian home. It wasn't that colonial families were dissatisfied with their post and beam homesteads. Certainly, the dwellings were rugged, weatherproof, and snug enough for their families. But by 1720, the prosperity of the colonies was on the upswing, just in time for a more sophisticated architectural style to emerge. Back in England, the Georgian buildings were all the rage for some 30 years before it hit our shores. Named for the four kings who began their successive reigns in 1714, the designs did have a touch of royalty. The formal symmetry usually introduced a single chimney or set of double chimneys, and often a hipped roof. Eaves were boxed with fancy moldings. Plain windows were also highlighted with moldings. Combinations from the carpenter's planes. Doorways were more outstanding, with pediments and pilasters, and much larger doors at times. Columns and bases and ornamental caps are set into a wall. By the mid-18th century, these prestigious homes dotted the colonial landscape in our area in considerable numbers. Paint protection. So to provide protection for our clapboard, from the sills to the shingles, the post and beam home had enough wooden armor to ward off centuries of weather, although paint gave an added exterior shield. Most homes were without the expensive coating before the mid-1700s. Barn red was by far the most popular color in the 18th century, and it became a favorite from its warm and low cost. This was taken from the fields of rocks with iron oxide in them, so it was very cheap and very economical to make. Other popular colors were pumpkin, yellow, cream, and white, and black. Doors were heightened with red, green, blue, and black. A white trim usually set off other colors to advantage. Flooring. Now that the outer shell of the house was weatherworthy, the housewright would turn his attention to the interior work. Temporarily, planking had served as flooring during the framing process. It was time to replace it. With the finished boards that had been seasoned since the first of timber was felled a year and a half prior, there must be no further shrinkage from drying once the floorboards had been nailed into place. It wasn't surprising that the English colonists chose their traditional oak for the floors. Although oak flooring persisted in many kitchens, it was the southern yellow pine and the northern white pine that soon became the woods of choice. These light, durable, and easily worked pines from virgin stands were sawn in random lengths for flooring. Floorboards would range between 10 and 20 inches in width and about an inch in thickness. Can you imagine 10 to 20 inches today? Wainscoting. The Dutch wainscot, meaning wall protection, may have been its origin. Then again, wainscot, the boarding found in the sides of a wagon, may have been at the root of it. At any rate, our American forefathers considered wainscoting as the sheathing or boarding that formed the walls of a room, or protected the walls of a room. Interior walls were sheathed with horizontal or vertical pine boards from the early 1600s. They were joined together with a simple beveled tongue in groove joint. As the wider variety of molding planes became available, the more decorative style bead and raised panel joint became the molding of choice. Although joining followed the days of the wainscoting were fast fading at the 18th century neared, it was a short step from sheathing to paneling. The housewright was ready with his assortment of planes that he joined the old wainscoting, a fashionable bead molding, and gave pleasing highlights to the shadows, to the framing that surrounded each panel, and even to the ends of the summer joints, putting the chamfer on and the lamb's tongue. The featured back of the panels was a real testimony of the skill of the craftsman today. The old wainscoting was not forgotten. To complement the panel wall, sheathing boards were laid horizontally along the base of the unpaneled walls. Each was topped by a chair rail, actually a continuation of the molding that ran under each windowsill. Full wainscoting was often retained in back rooms such as the kitchen and the lesser second floor rooms. Above the chair rail, wainscoting was a smooth expanse of plaster. It would be whitewashed to give the light and airy contrast to the paneled fireplace wall. The woodwork, although expensive, gave a room a lively, cheerful feeling. By the 1720s, more and more households were using such colors as Indian red, yellow ochre, moss green, Prussian blue. The older central chimney homes usually had a fireplace wall that was paneled, simple but yet reserved. When the Georgian central second half and two chimney homes became the style of choice, the front rooms would have been had a more formal and ornate feeling. The fireplace was flanked by fluted pilasters, pedestals, and caps. A fancy cornice ran along the top wall to give an element of elegant final touch. Plaster. When it came to finishing, the interior walls of the early 17th century, there was an alternative to the vertical and horizontal wainscot boards. Back in Mother England, the few remaining woodlands yielded mighty little boardage. Therefore, the gap between the studs was filled with either wattle or daub or bricks. Either provided a surface that was flush with the studs for surfacing, with a hay or clay mixture. The studs were first scored to give a holding surface for the clay. Lime plaster. Clay was expensive and plastic enough to fill the voids between the bricks and the stones. Yet it lacked the permanence of lime mortar when exposed to the elements. Many brick and stone chimneys were laid up with clay to the shingles, but above that, only the weather-worthy lime mortar would do. It's the only thing that would hold up. While the stone-like lime mortar and plaster made clay a second best, the raw materials were not always at hand. The clay could always be dug up from local deposits all along the shoreline. Where ancient Indian shell mounds that yielded a bonanza in time. This raw lime harvest has been processed into a moisture-resistant covering over the lath framework.